Load of options.
Jonathan, listen to me. What have you done?
Finished it.
Walk away.
The film opens with John Wick slamming his car into a concrete wall. He crawls out of the wreckage covered in blood, pressing his hand firmly against a wound in his abdomen. He pulls out his phone and watches a video of his deceased wife, Helen, enjoying herself on a beach. Then his body gives out and he drops to the ground. We're taken back several days earlier, on an overcast morning, as John wakes up and his mind drifts to memories of Helen. He thinks about a meal they shared together and the heartbreaking moment she collapsed into his embrace. We then see him at the hospital, tenderly pressing his lips to Helen's forehead as the doctor gives the couple their privacy. John, completely devastated, clutches his wife's necklace. We soon understand that Helen had been battling a terminal illness that ultimately claimed her life. John climbs into his car and drives to the funeral. When the service ends and the other mourners have drifted away, John remains standing alone at the graveside. A man observes him from afar, and once the ceremony wraps up, an old companion named Marcus approaches, expressing his sympathy and checking in the way a genuine friend would. The two share a brief exchange before Marcus says his farewell and heads off. Back at home after the burial, John begins straightening up the place. The doorbell pulls him away from that task, and he opens the door to find a delivery woman holding a package. Inside the box is a tiny beagle puppy. Alongside the dog, he discovers a handwritten note from Helen. In it, she tells him she has made peace with her fate and wants him to find joy and love again, beginning with this little puppy. John becomes overwhelmed reading those words and breaks down in tears. He lifts the puppy out of the box and notices that the collar is decorated with small flowers, leading him to believe Helen had already chosen the name Daisy for her. Later, he picks the puppy up from his bed and sets her gently on the floor. The next morning, John is woken up by Daisy scrambling onto the bed and following him from room to room throughout the house. He pours cornflakes for both of them and decides he should buy proper dog food, taking Daisy along for a ride in his prized 1969 Ford Mustang Mach 1. While stopped at a gas station, John is approached by Iosef Tarasov along with two associates. Iosef takes a liking to John's car and asks what he'd take for it. John tells him it's not for sale. Iosef mutters something insulting in Russian about everything having a price, to which John responds in kind, infuriating Iosef until one of his companions holds him back. John drives away unbothered. Later that day, John heads out to a desolate construction site and throws the Mustang into aggressive drifts, pushing it hard around the lot to burn off his frustration. He loops around the area repeatedly, barely missing parked trucks before finally bringing the car to a stop. That night he goes to bed, but Daisy wakes him up needing to go outside. He takes her downstairs, and out of the shadows, two figures appear. A third person comes from behind and cracks him over the skull with a baseball bat. As John lies helpless on the ground, the intruders go after Daisy and one of them kills her. They want the car keys, and once they find them, the man who hit him pulls off his mask. It's Iosef. He curses at John and knocks him out cold. When John comes to, he finds his little dog dead. He lies beside her for a moment, then buries her and begins cleaning up the house, haunted by the memory of his wife alongside the trauma of what just happened. Meanwhile, Iosef drives the Mustang to a shop owned by a man named Aurelio and demands clean paperwork and a fresh plate for the vehicle. Aurelio takes one look at the car and knows exactly what it is. He demands to know how Iosef got it. Iosef boasts about stealing it, and Aurelio immediately orders him out of the shop. Iosef talks back arrogantly, reminding Aurelio that his family effectively owns him. Aurelio tells him to be quiet, says he works with Iosef's father, and punches him square in the face. One of Iosef's men draws a weapon, but another stops him from pulling the trigger. Iosef hurls one final insult at Aurelio and storms out, threatening to take his business elsewhere. Later, John stops by the shop and asks about the car. Aurelio tells him the car was there, and that Iosef is Vigo's son. Not long after, Vigo phones Aurelio and asks precisely why he laid a hand on his son. Aurelio answers simply,
"Because he stole John Wick's car, sir, and, killed his dog."
Vigo goes silent. He seems deeply troubled by this news and makes his way to his penthouse, where he orders his men to bring Iosef to him. John, meanwhile, heads down to his basement with a sledgehammer and starts breaking open sections of the floor, revealing a hidden cache of weapons and gold coins. Determined to address the situation, Vigo visits Iosef at his home. He starts off with a compliment about the jacket Iosef is wearing, then drives his fist into the young man's stomach to make clear that he has made a catastrophic error. Even as his men suggest they leave it alone, Vigo stays and launches into an explanation. He tells Iosef that John Wick, once known as Baba Yaga, the boogeyman, used to work under him before he chose to retire and marry Helen. Vigo describes watching John once kill 3 men inside a bar using nothing more than a pencil. He then reveals that when John wanted out, he was handed what seemed like an impossible assignment involving multiple high-level assassinations in an absurdly short window of time. Somehow, against all expectation, John completed it, and that accomplishment was the very foundation upon which the Tarasov Empire was built. Iosef insists he can handle John, but Vigo warns him plainly that John is coming, and there is no escaping that reality. Vigo tries to head this off by phoning John directly, but John immediately hangs up. That move tells Vigo everything. That night, John arms himself fully aware that Vigo has already sent a team of killers to his house. Those assassins quickly learn the hard way what it means to go up against the boogeyman directly. John moves through them without hesitation, engaging in close, brutal combat before delivering lethal finishing blows. All told, Vigo sent 12 men. It makes no difference. John tears through every single one of them. When it's over, a police officer knocks on his front door. John recognizes the officer by name and asks if someone filed a noise complaint. The officer confirms it and glances past John at the body visible inside, asking whether John has come back to the game. John tells him he's just tidying up. The officer takes that at face value and simply leaves to manage the aftermath and clear out the bodies. John then calls in an underworld cleanup crew, and it's obvious from their familiarity with the situation that this won't be the last time he needs their services. Meanwhile, Vigo tracks down John's associate Marcus and offers him a $2 million contract to take John out. He also has his assistant Avi circulate the contract to other potential takers. Marcus accepts. John, for his part, makes his way to the Continental Hotel in New York City, a property that exists exclusively to serve the criminal underworld. The Continental's single most important rule is that no acts of violence are permitted anywhere on its grounds. John spots familiar faces, including Perkins and someone named Sharon. He greets his friend, books a room using the gold coins that serve as currency in this world, and is then introduced to the hotel's proprietor, Winston. When John asks Winston about Iosef's whereabouts, Winston tells him Iosef can be found at a nightclub called the Red Circle. John heads straight there. Inside, Iosef and his crew are having a good time. John runs into an old contact on the way in and gently suggests the man take the evening off, which he wisely accepts. Inside the club, Iosef is relaxing in the bathhouse area. John appears on the lower level of the club and drops one of Iosef's associates. Iosef spots him and runs. John works through the remaining gunmen, and even though he clears them all out, Iosef manages to slip away. Iosef calls his man Victor, only to hear John's voice on the other end, taunting him. John eventually makes his way back to the Continental and tells Sharon he needs a doctor in his room. The medic patches him up and warns him he needs to rest or he'll tear his stitches wide open. John doesn't particularly grasp the concept of rest. Later that night, Marcus climbs to a rooftop across the street and sets up his sniper rifle. He spots John asleep, but also catches a figure slipping in through a window and fires a warning shot to rouse John. Perkins then opens fire on him, but John narrowly avoids being hit. It turns out Vigo is offering $4 million to break the Continental's rules and eliminate John on the premises. John wrestles with Perkins and gets her in a chokehold, offering to let her live in exchange for information. She tells him Vigo keeps the bulk of his wealth in a church basement and gives him the address. John knocks her out and leaves her with a man named Harry in exchange for a gold coin. What John doesn't know is that Perkins has dislocated her own thumb to slip free. She escapes, beats Harry in a fight, puts a pillow against his head, and shoots through it. John then goes to Vigo's secret stockpile inside a chapel. He shoots the priest and fights his way through every man in the building. He forces the priest to take him to the vault or face death, and the priest complies. John sends the women inside the vault away, then burns the entire structure to the ground, wiping out Vigo's fortune in one move. He then positions himself on a rooftop beside the chapel to wait. He spots Vigo and his senior crew arriving, and a firefight breaks out with John going up against Vigo's men one by one. He takes out most of them until one henchman jumps into an SUV. As John reloads and finishes off another enemy, someone clocks him from behind and he crashes to the ground. Vigo seizes the opportunity to take him captive. When John comes around, Vigo asks him why he's doing all of this over a car and a dog. John corrects him, explaining that Iosef destroyed the last gift his wife ever gave him, a puppy meant to help him through his grief, and tells Vigo he can either hand over Iosef or die alongside him. Vigo walks away and leaves John to his thugs, who begin to beat him. Marcus, watching from a distance, shoots one of the men, giving John the opening he needs to deal with the other. John sprints into the street, spots Vigo's getaway vehicle, and takes out the driver. He levels his weapon at Vigo, who was then forced to reveal that Iosef is hidden at a safe house in Brooklyn. John decides to let Vigo go for now. At the safe house, Iosef is inside a room playing video games with one of his guards. The area is heavily secured with multiple teams and snipers posted all around. As each one checks in, we see that John is also checking in, having already neutralized one of the snipers and taken his rifle. He begins firing with surgical precision. Iosef bolts, but his escape vehicles explode into flames simultaneously. He takes off running, but John catches up. puts a bullet in his stomach, then one in his head, without a moment's pause. With his revenge complete, John thanks Marcus for his help. What neither of them realizes is that Perkins spotted the two of them communicating. She relays what she saw to Vigo, who responds by sending men to trap Marcus inside his house. The scene then cuts to Vigo calling John, letting him know that Marcus has been captured for failing to complete his contract. Marcus is already under attack and tries to make his last stand, fighting back hard and taking out several men before Perkins shoots him fatally. Vigo then heads for a helicopter set to carry him out of New York. The original plan was for John to walk into Marcus's home and fall into Perkins's ambush, but Perkins receives an urgent summons to meet with Winston at the Continental. Winston tells her plainly that she broke the hotel's rules, and as a result, she loses both her membership and her life. Upon finding Marcus's body, John commits himself completely to destroying Vigo and everything connected to him. He punches the side of his car in rage, then spots Vigo and his convoy moving toward the helicopter and tries to ram them with his vehicle. Vigo tells Avi to take John out, but John's car slams into one of the SUVs and sends it careening off the road. The two sides play a violent game of bumper cars until John executes a spectacular maneuver that drives Vigo's vehicle into a pole. Vigo's men pile out of the SUVs and open fire, but John uses his car as both a shield and a battering ram, systematically eliminating every last one of them. Avi steps out personally to handle things, but John kills him too. Vigo then slams his own SUV into John's car, but John gets clear before the vehicle goes over the edge. With both cars out of commission, the two men square off like it's a proper Western duel, drop their guns, and go at each other with their fists in the pouring rain. It's a fairly even contest until Vigo produces a knife. John uses the blade to his advantage in a brutal and calculating way, letting it strike him, then using the leverage of the blade stuck in his torso to snap Vigo's arm. He then drives the knife into Vigo's chest. The two men sit together for a moment, Vigo unable to comprehend that John did all of this because of a dog. John walks away and leaves him to die. The film then returns to where it began, John bleeding out but refusing to stop. Energized by watching the video of Helen on his phone, he pulls himself to a nearby animal shelter to have his wound treated and adopts a pit bull before heading home. Weeks later, John Wick is in the middle of a full-blown car chase, his objective being the recovery of his Ford Mustang from a man named Abram Tarasov. John runs down a motorcycle rider, flips the bike, and takes an invitation from the rider that tells him exactly where Abram is located. Abram, you see, is Vigo's brother, having heard that John is. On his way, Abram immediately starts shutting down his operation. One particularly overconfident henchman dismisses the threat and tells Abram he can handle John himself. He asks whether they're genuinely turning everything upside down over a car. Abram corrects him sharply, reminding him this isn't just any car, it's John Wick's car, and this is the man who killed his nephew, his brother, and a small army of their people over a vehicle and a dog. Abram stresses that John Wick is a man of absolute focus, unwavering commitment, and pure, unstoppable will. He reminds his men of the story about John killing 3 people with a pencil. John, meanwhile, has already found the Mustang and is cutting straight toward Abram's hideout. Tarasov's men intercept him on the way, and his car takes a hit. A second attacker joins and does even more damage to the Mustang. John still manages to get it running and push forward, but a lone motorcyclist stays on him and keeps shooting. John sacrifices one of his car doors to bring the rider down. He presses on, but finds himself outmaneuvered and knocked out of his vehicle, forced into hand-to-hand fighting. He handles his attackers efficiently as ever, and eventually makes his way to Abram's room. Abram is terrified. John, in a surprisingly measured moment, lets him live on the condition that Abram swears never to cross paths with him again. They agree to that truce, and John walks away, returns home, his task complete. Shortly after, John digs up the floor of his house again and puts all the reminders of his former life as an assassin back into the ground. He wants nothing more than to live as a grieving man, simply mourning his wife. A few days pass before Aurelio swings by at John's request to assess the damage to the Mustang. Aurelio warns that getting it back to its original condition will take a while. That evening, an unwelcome guest arrives at John's door. Santino D'Antonio, a powerful and dangerous figure in the criminal underworld, comes to remind John of a shared history. He helped John complete the impossible task that allowed John to retire and marry Helen, and in exchange John made a solemn oath, a marker, sealed with his own blood and represented by a medallion. Now Santino is here to collect. Despite the weight of that obligation, John tells Santino he's retired and done with that world. Santino doesn't accept this. He pulls out a grenade launcher and burns John's house to the ground. John and his dog somehow make it out alive, and John stands in the street watching every memory inside that house turn to ash. With nowhere else to go, John takes his dog and checks in at the Continental Hotel in New York. He turns to Winston for guidance, and Winston wastes no time reminding him of reality. Refusing a marker means breaking 2 foundational rules of the underworld. no killing on Continental grounds, and the absolute obligation to honor every marker. The D'Antonio family is known for their ferocity, largely because Santino's father holds a seat at the High Table, a council of 12 crime lords who govern all the Continental hotels across the world. Confronted with this, John has no choice but to honor his commitment. He goes to Santino, who gets straight to business. He wants John to kill his sister, Gianna. Santino covets the High Table seat that their father has designated for her, and he wants it for himself. Bound by the marker, John accepts the assignment. John visits his storage unit to collect what he needs and flies to Rome. At the Roman branch of the Continental Hotel, the manager Julius greets him warmly. When Julius lightheartedly asks whether John is in town to target the Pope, John assures him that's not on the agenda and is granted full access to the hotel's resources. He then visits a specialized tailor shop that caters exclusively to assassins, crafting garments with ballistic protection woven into them. After that, he moves on to the armory, where the shopkeeper already knows John Wick's reputation well enough to know precisely what weapons he'll require. Before he can move, though, he needs to know Gianna's exact location, so he meets with a contact who provides him with a detailed layout of the venue, mapping every way in and every way out. As night comes on, John suits up and heads in. He infiltrates the celebration marking Gianna's ascension to her high table seat and corners her in a private dressing room. Facing the certainty of her death, Gianna chooses to end things on her own terms. As she takes her final breath, John puts a bullet in her head to ensure the marker is fulfilled. With the job done, John tries to make his exit. But Cassian, Gianna's personal bodyguard, sees him leaving and puts it together instantly. Cassian understands that John was sent here to kill Gianna, and in a heartbeat, a full gunfight erupts. John runs through a crowded concert, exchanging fire with pursuers, and when he clears that chaos, he runs into still more opposition. He cuts down roughly 6 men before diving into the city's ancient underground catacombs to change course. Inside the tunnels, he crosses paths with Ares, Santino's devoted bodyguard, and what follows is a betrayal. An ambush has been set. John uses his armored clothing to absorb the hits, knocking several attackers aside. He uses the winding tunnels to his advantage, isolating opponents and confronting them in smaller numbers. What follows is a breathtaking sequence of absolute lethality. Target after target goes down with chilling efficiency. He dispatches 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 men in roughly 45 seconds. John barely clears the catacombs before a car strikes him on the street. Cassian steps out of the vehicle and opens fire. The two then square off in a brutal hand-to-hand battle, both men skilled and vicious, neither one giving an inch. The fight crashes to a halt when they both tumble into the lobby of the Continental Hotel. Bound by the rule against violence on the premises, both men immediately stop fighting. In an unexpected moment of calm, the two enemies end up seated together at the bar. John tells Cassian the truth about who orchestrated the hit. Even after learning Santino was behind it, Cassian tells John he's going to kill him, but promises he'll make it fast. When John returns to his room, Santino calls. Santino says he understands if John is feeling a little put out by everything, making it sound almost reasonable. In a deeply cynical move, Santino then places a $7 million bounty on John's head, packaging it as revenge for his sister's death. The next morning, John checks out of the Continental in Rome and begins the journey back to New York. The contract draws immediate attention from some of the most dangerous killers on Earth. Santino, meanwhile, meets with Winston and is asked for a blood oath, confirming that John has satisfied the marker and is free of obligation. Santino brushes this off, assuming John will be dead before he ever reaches New York. Winston looks at him directly and warns Santino that he has made an enormous and terrible mistake, that he has effectively stabbed the devil in the back and forced him out of the quiet life he had fought so hard to earn. In New York, John is not welcomed back with anything other than gunfire, as assassins eager to collect $7 million come at him from every direction. Killing John Wick, as each of them soon finds out, is not something that goes well for the person attempting it. Down in the subway, John encounters Cassian again. The two engage in a silent running gunfight through a crowded train car, using suppressors so the ordinary passengers have no idea what's happening around them. The confrontation erupts into a savage fistfight that ends with John stabbing Cassian in the aorta and leaving his survival in serious question. The fight leaves John badly hurt. He spots a homeless man and offers a gold coin for help, and with that man's assistance manages to extract himself from the situation. Still wounded and needing more than bandages, John seeks out a powerful underground figure known as the Bowery King. Inside the Bowery King's hidden domain, John's wounds receive some attention, but he needs more than medical help. He asks the Bowery King to use his vast street-level intelligence network to locate Santino, and he also needs weapons. The Bowery King wants to understand why he should put himself out for John. John lays it out plainly. If Santino takes a high table seat, the Bowery King loses everything: his power, his network, his resources, all of it. The prospect of John Wick taking on a High Table member, however, clearly piques the Bowery King's interest. After weighing John's argument, he decides to help. In a memorable moment, he hands John a pistol loaded with exactly 7 bullets, one for each million of the bounty, and sends him to an art museum where Santino is hosting a gala. Armed and absolutely determined, John makes his entrance at the museum. The crowd on the dance floor parts around him like water as people recognize him and back away. John draws his weapon and works through 7 of Santino's men, 1 bullet each. He then has to take weapons from fallen enemies to keep going. He pursues Santino relentlessly, cutting through anyone stationed in his path. The chase leads into a mirror maze, a deeply disorienting room that seems to multiply and twist the space around you in every direction. John struggles to navigate it and close the distance on Santino. Making things worse, Ares shows up with a group of guards, adding another layer of danger. Even this doesn't slow John down significantly. He picks off Santino's security one by one until the last of them goes down, clearing his path forward. Finally, John comes face to face with Ares. They throw themselves into a brutal close-quarters brawl, pushing each other to absolute exhaustion. John wins, leaving Ares defeated and dead. In the confusion, however, Santino manages to disappear. He's taken shelter inside the Continental Hotel. John arrives shortly after and asks Sharon where Santino is hiding. Sharon directs him to the hotel lounge. When John gets there, Winston intercepts him urgently, warning him not to do anything on Continental grounds, stressing that the consequences of breaking the no-killing rule would be catastrophic. John, however, has reached his limit. His home was destroyed. He was dragged back into a life of violence he thought he had permanently escaped. He ignores Winston's warning entirely and in one swift movement kills Santino right there in the lounge, sending the entire criminal underworld into a state of shock. Weighed down by what he's just done, John leaves the Continental quickly and returns to the ruins of his old house, where he sits with the memory of Helen and thinks about all the beautiful moments they shared there, a stark contrast to everything his life has become. The following day, Sharon escorts John to meet Winston in a park. There, Winston tells John the full cost of what he did. By killing Santino on Continental grounds, John has violated one of the most sacred rules in the underworld. The High Table's response is to double his bounty and extend it globally. Winston then formally declares John excommunicado, stripping him of every right and resource that the underworld provides. But Winston grants John a 1-hour head start before the declaration goes into effect, a small professional courtesy. He also gives John a marker, a token that could one day be used to call in a favor. Everyone in the park stops and stares at John. When they go back to what they were doing, John tells Winston simply that he will kill anyone who comes for him. Winston acknowledges this with a quiet nod. As John walks away from the park with his dog, Winston sets the excommunicado in motion. Phones across the park begin ringing simultaneously. The hunt is on. John starts running. The film closes on a note of tense uncertainty with John dashing through the packed streets of New York, counting the minutes as his grace period burns down. He ducks into an alley and crosses paths with the TikTok Man, one of the Bowery King's informants. With barely 20 minutes left, John hops into a taxi, only to find the roads completely gridlocked. He pays the driver a gold coin and asks him to deliver his dog safely to the Continental, then continues on foot. He stops at a library and asks for a specific book. Inside it is a hidden compartment holding gold coins, a marker, and a photograph of him with Helen, which he kisses gently. His quiet moment is broken by the arrival of a massive man named Ernest. John tries to tell him that his grace period hasn't officially ended yet. Ernest doesn't care about the technicality. A vicious fight breaks out inside the library's silence, ending with John using the very book to shatter Ernest's jaw and end him. The victory costs John a stab wound to the shoulder. With 5 minutes left on the clock, he goes urgently to a doctor's home. The doctor helps him reluctantly and then stops completely the moment the grace period runs out. John is now worth $14 million to whoever kills him, and every elite assassin on the planet has been activated. John has to finish stitching himself up while the doctor watches, washing down the pain with whatever pills he can find. The doctor then asks John to shoot him, a staged wound to convince the High Table he complied with the excommunicado. John obliges, leaving the doctor alive but injured before walking out to face whatever is waiting for him. What's waiting is absolutely relentless. Cornered inside an antique arms shop, John improvises brilliantly, using the collection of historical weapons, knives, and blades as tools of combat in a vicious and chaotic brawl. He walks out of the shop, battered but still moving, only to find more assassins waiting in the street. He leads them into a nearby stable, where he uses the horses themselves as weapons, their kicks doing enormous damage to anyone caught in range. He escapes the stable riding one of the horses, but 2 motorcyclists come after him immediately. In a display of stunning agility and accuracy, he deals with both of them without ever dismounting. The bounty on his head rises to $15 million. John takes shelter at a theater, where he is frisked and disarmed before being brought to meet the director. He asks for her help, and offers her the cross he retrieved from the library, a symbol of something shared between them. She leads him backstage and agrees to arrange passage for him to Casablanca. To make their agreement official and to sever their ties formally, she brands him with the mark of the cross. Elsewhere, a composed and formidable woman arrives at the Continental and presents a coin to Sharon. Winston is informed that an adjudicator has arrived. The adjudicator inspects Santino's body and then informs Winston that he must vacate his position for failing to enforce the Continental's no-violence rule against John. She then visits the Bowery King. Despite his insistence that he respected John's excommunicado, she tells him the High Table's authority reaches everywhere. She orders him to abandon his position and leave the city because of his choice to supply John with the gun that killed Santino. Unbowed, the Bowery King tells her defiantly that she can't remove him from his throne because he is the throne. John arrives in Casablanca and almost immediately 3 knife-carrying assassins come at him. He kills one, but the fight is cut short by another man who announces that the local hotel manager has granted John amnesty. One of the remaining attackers tries to continue anyway and is shot dead by the newcomer, who then escorts John to the Casablanca branch of the Continental Hotel. Inside, John notices photographs of a woman and a young girl on the wall. Suddenly, 2 large, aggressive dogs take up positions beside him. From the shadows emerges Sophia, the hotel's manager, who promptly shoots him. His bulletproof suit absorbs the round. Sophia admits she probably should kill him, but he shows her a marker, a life debt she owes him for saving her daughter years ago. Sophia begs John not to invoke the marker, but he will not back down. He tells her she must lead him to her former employer. Reluctantly, Sophia agrees to honor the debt. Elsewhere, the adjudicator visits a small sushi restaurant to meet a man named Zero. Zero clocks the High Table's coin immediately and understands exactly why she's there. He already knows about John and makes no secret of his eagerness to hunt him down. The adjudicator assigns him this task as well as dealing with those who helped John. Back at the theater, the director watches her students perform ballet, completely unaware that her guards are being slaughtered by silent, ruthless ninjas outside. The calm of the performance is broken when 3 men walk onto the stage, followed by the adjudicator and Zero. The adjudicator tells the director that her assistance to John constitutes a violation of her agreement with the High Table. Wanting to demonstrate her loyalty, the director is told that her penance must be paid in blood. Zero drives his blade through both of her hands, leaving her in agony but breathing. Sophia, meanwhile, readies herself for a fight, arming both herself and her dogs. Despite John's assurances that he only wants to talk to her former boss, she remains skeptical. They go together to a compound and meet with Barada, Sophia's former employer. John asks Barada how to find the Elder, the one person who exists above the High Table, hoping to negotiate a way out of his situation. Barada explains that the Elder cannot be tracked down. He tells John to walk out into the desert, follow the stars until he is on the verge of dying, and perhaps then the Elder will come to him. But before John and Sophia can leave, Barada demands a tribute, one of Sophia's dogs. She refuses. Barada shoots one of the dogs. He didn't count on the dog being armored. The bullet doesn't penetrate. Sophia responds by putting a round in Barada and starting a firefight with his guards. One of her dogs launches itself at the enemy. After the guards are dealt with, Sophia shoots Barada again in the leg for good measure. The 2 of them, dogs in tow, push their way out of the compound, gunning down additional guards as they go. Their destination is the desert. Deep in the open dunes, John and Sophia come to a halt. John pricks his finger and uses his blood to sign the marker, releasing Sophia from her obligation. She gives nearly all of the remaining water to her dogs and takes the last small swallow for herself before handing the almost empty bottle to John. She tells him his death is coming whether out here or somewhere else. Then she watches as he walks alone into the endless stretch of sand. He endures scorching days and freezing nights crossing the dunes, his strength fading with every step until he can no longer stay upright and collapses face. Down in the sand. Back in New York, inside the Bowery King's fortified territory, a squad of highly skilled ninjas dispatches his guards with terrifying efficiency. Zero and the adjudicator reach the rooftop where the Bowery King waits. He announces his willingness to bow to the High Table, but the adjudicator tells him his window, for that has closed. The Bowery King releases a single pigeon before Zero punishes him with 7 precise cuts, one for each bullet he gave to John Wick. Out in the desert, a cloaked figure comes upon the unconscious John. He wakes inside a lavishly furnished tent and finds himself face to face with the Elder, a man who says he has never encountered a soul as lost as John's. When asked why he wants to live, John says it is to keep the memory of his wife Helen alive within him. The Elder lays out the choice: die in the desert or reclaim the identity of the boogeyman. John can never truly leave the underworld, but he can have the excommunicado reversed if he pledges to kill Winston. John accepts the terms. He severs his own wedding ring finger and gives the ring to the Elder as a gesture of absolute loyalty. The Elder arranges for John to be outfitted with new clothes and sent back to New York. When John arrives in the city, 2 assassins move to intercept him, but a group of ninjas cut them down before they can act. The ninjas bring John before Zero, and a tense standoff develops between the two men before a line of schoolchildren crossing the street creates a distraction. John uses it to escape, killing two ninjas on motorcycles and taking one of their bikes. Zero and his crew pursue him along the freeway, attacking with swords at high speed. John neutralizes several of them while still moving at full speed. The chase continues into the city before John and Zero both crash near the Continental Hotel. Because John has touched the hotel grounds, Zero cannot kill him there under the Continental's rules. Sharon takes John to a waiting room where Zero follows, barely containing his excitement. He insists to John that the two of them are fundamentally alike. John doesn't agree. He is briefly reunited with his dog, tells it to sit and stay, and is then brought to meet Winston in a special glass-enclosed room designed to confirm whether a visitor is concealing weapons. Winston knows exactly why John is here and admits he'd rather face death at the hands of a friend than an enemy, but he offers John a different path. John could follow through on his orders and remain the boogeyman forever, or he could defy the High Table and die as the man Helen loved. The adjudicator arrives to hear Winston's response regarding stepping down. Winston refuses to give up his position. She then asks John whether he intends to kill Winston. He refuses as well. With both refusals on the table, the adjudicator announces the deconsecration of the Continental. All rules are suspended. The premises are now open territory and both Winston and John are valid targets. The High Table's elite enforcer unit is on its way. Anticipating what's coming, Winston reinstates all of John's privileges and the armorer is told to prepare. John is briefed on the enemy's upgraded body armor, and the armorer recommends switching to a heavier caliber to counter it. As the battle approaches, Winston retreats to the safety of the armory, leaving John, Sharon, and a handful of committed staff to hold back the incoming wave. The High Table's forces arrive in heavy armor that standard rounds can barely dent, forcing John to close the distance and engage at nearly point-blank range. During the fight, the adjudicator calls Winston and taunts him about how long his defense can last. Winston cuts the call short. The first wave finishes off all remaining staff, leaving only John and Sharon. John does everything he can with limited effect from his pistol until he starts firing from underneath the attackers' helmets and begins dropping them. He and Sharon fall back to the armory. Sharon equips John with an armor-piercing shotgun capable of blowing through the enemy's plating. When the second wave descends, John and Sharon take them apart efficiently, the new weapons cutting through the High Table's armor with brutal ease. After working through more of them with his pistol, John is caught at gunpoint by one mercenary but is saved unexpectedly by Zero, who has been watching and waiting. Zero chases John through the building into the glass-walled room, where John faces off against two highly agile ninjas whose fight sends shards of glass cascading everywhere. John defeats both of them using their own sword. Climbing the stairs towards Zero, John is suddenly ambushed by Zero's elite shinobi, who play with him the way a cat toys with something smaller. They mock him for slowing down, joke about how retirement has made him lazy, even help him back onto his feet to prolong the fight. John shakes off the fog of exhaustion, uses his belt as a weapon, and launches into a third, grinding round of combat. As the fight wears on, John resorts to increasingly unorthodox tactics, headbutts, ear slaps, brute kicks, culminating in a massive body slam that shatters the glass floor beneath them. The shinobi cannot recover from what John has done to them. John, somehow still on his feet, goes looking for Zero. He finds him upstairs and the two immediately fall into an intense sword duel that goes back and forth for an extended stretch before John uses Zero's own vanishing technique against him and lands a killing sword thrust through his chest. Both men sink to the ground, exhausted. As he bleeds out, Zero talks about how much he enjoyed the fight, how extraordinary it was. John gives him a brief dismissive response and walks away. Zero dies where he sits. Following this dramatic show of resistance, the adjudicator contacts Winston again and suggests that perhaps a negotiation would serve both sides better. Winston agrees to hear her out. They meet on the rooftop where she tells him this was just an opening move and the Continental will eventually fall. Winston is unmoved. He asserts his deep, permanent connection to New York City and his absolute intention to reclaim the Continental, calling himself the living embodiment of the city itself. John arrives on the rooftop where the adjudicator does something unexpected. She reframes Winston's violent defense as a demonstration of loyalty to the High Table. She reinstates the Continental and confirms Winston's position as its manager, but she insists that something must be done about John Wick. Winston raises his weapon and shoots John multiple times. The force carries him backward off the roof edge, where he tumbles down several structures that partially break his fall. The adjudicator, satisfied with what she's witnessed, takes her leave, but her satisfaction is short-lived. The moment she re-enters the Continental, she is told that John's body has disappeared. Winston is equally alarmed. They cannot afford a vengeful John Wick out there with a grudge. Winston says the name quietly, Baba Yaga. In an alleyway, the TikTok man pushes a cart carrying John's battered and broken body. John is deposited in front of a makeshift throne where the heavily wounded Bowery King sits. The Bowery King addresses the barely conscious John, raging about betrayal and the idiotic rules of the High Table. Burning with a desire for revenge, the Bowery King announces that he wants blood. He asks John a single question. John slowly raises his head and manages to say one word. Yeah. Chapter 4 begins with John Wick in the middle of intense physical training. The Bowery King walks in carrying a new suit and asks John if he's ready. John says yeah. The scene moves to the desert where John is on horseback chasing 3 riders. They flee, but John guns down the first one, then runs down the second, and finally the third. He dismounts and reloads as he walks calmly toward the Elder, who has watched everything from a distance. John tells the Elder he wants his ring and his freedom returned to him. The Elder replies that John no longer has the ring, and the only peace John will ever know is in death. John doesn't accept that answer and puts 2 bullets in the Elder before walking away. Back at the New York Continental, a man known as the Harbinger arrives and hands an envelope to Sharon, insisting on speaking with the manager. Sharon reaches Winston and lets the man come upstairs. The Harbinger reveals that the hotel has been condemned and produces an hourglass, giving Winston 1 hour to clear out. He also informs Winston that the 12 members of the High Table have issued a decree granting a man named the Marquis the authority to act as judge, jury, and executioner. Winston and Sharon immediately go to meet the Marquis. They enter the room and find the hourglass already there. The Marquis delivers a pointed line. Second chances are the refuge of men who have failed. Winston tells him he shot John Wick, and the Marquis laughs, noting that John is still alive and contaminating everything he touches. He informs them that the Continental is being expelled from New York, and Sharon insists that rules matter, even for the High Table. The Marquis blames Winston for everything John has done, and as the last grains of sand fall, the Continental Hotel explodes. Winston is then declared excommunicado. The Marquis raises a gun and aims it, but shoots Sharon instead. Sharon hits the ground and breathes his final words. The scene shifts to introduce us to a blind man named Kane in Paris. He hears a young girl playing music for a small crowd nearby. Shortly after, he is called to meet with the Marquis, who immediately addresses a boundary that was nearly crossed. Kane had gotten too close to his daughter that day. Despite his retirement, the Marquis makes clear that Kane's daughter's life is at stake if he does not comply and take a life for the High Table. Kane is handed a card with the word Wick on it. He pauses when he sees it, admitting that John was his friend. Nevertheless, he agrees to offer his services to the High Table. We move to Tokyo, at the Continental Hotel there. A tracker approaches the front desk where we meet Akira, who approves the tracker's dog as an emotional support animal. She walks with the hotel's manager, Shimazu, who is also her father. Akira tells him the staff are nervous because his connection to John Wick could bring unpredictable consequences with the High Table. Shimazu tells her not to worry because they have done nothing wrong. He leaves her and heads upstairs where John is waiting. Shimazu tells John that killing the Elder was a serious miscalculation and informs him of Sharon's death. John is visibly shaken. He tells John the High Table will not stop, and John calls Shimazu a dear friend. Downstairs, the tracker is studying his John Wick dossier when he notices representatives from the High Table arriving at the hotel. They go to Akira and ask for the manager. Akira tells them to make themselves comfortable and rushes upstairs to her father, where she sees John as well. Shimazu tells her to stay with John while he deals with the men below. On his way down, he instructs his staff to arm themselves and prepare for any outcome. He greets the High Table representatives downstairs. They believe the hotel is actively sheltering John Wick and demand full access to the building. Shimazu agrees on the condition that they surrender their weapons at the door, since no business is conducted on Continental grounds. Kane then appears and greets Shimazu warmly. They exchange words about their long-standing friendship until the High Table representative silences them and announces that the hotel is deconsecrated. The lights go off. When they come back on dimly, archers have positioned themselves throughout the room. They open fire, dropping several men. Swords come out. A brutal close-quarters fight erupts. The hotel staff win the engagement and level their weapons at the last man standing. At the same time, a heavily armored strike team enters the building with orders to find John Wick. The men retreat to the rooftop. Akira and John face a new assault. Akira makes precise shots and takes down several attackers. John has identified the weakness in the armor, the neck, and uses that knowledge to eliminate multiple men in quick succession. The remaining forces continue killing anyone they find inside the hotel. Kane throws himself into the action and, for a blind man, is absolutely devastating in close combat. Akira and John fight toward an exit, cutting down every attacker in their path. Akira is a formidable fighter, dispatching one opponent after another with lethal efficiency. John handles several of his own, but Akira is shot. Her father rushes to her, kills her attackers, lifts her up, and tells John to leave the way he came in. As John fights his way out, he runs into 4 more assailants. He takes out 2 cleanly, then battles the remaining pair. After spending enormous amounts of ammunition punching through their armor, he puts them both down and picks up a rifle. Then a man the size of a professional basketball player appears, and John decides that nunchucks are the appropriate tool. He takes on 2 opponents with them before drawing his pistols and finishing them. He runs into more enemies, but the automatic weapon handles them quickly. He goes back to the nunchucks because he prefers them, makes a series of extraordinary moves, and brings the man down. He gets a 2-second breath before Kane enters the space. The 2 of them go at each other, exchanging shots at near 0 distance until Kane gains the upper hand. Then the tracker opens fire on Kane, creating enough of a distraction for John to escape. The bounty on John has now reached $20 million. Outside, John kills another man and takes his medallion. Out of nowhere, a dog appears and takes out 2 attackers. The tracker reveals himself. John is confused. The tracker kills a man who was about to hit John from behind, then tells John he wants more money and lets him go. Elsewhere, Akira and Shimazu attempt to escape together, but Kane intercepts them. He tells them to give him John's location and walk away, but Shimazu refuses to betray John and draws his sword. A duel begins. Kane outclasses him and delivers a fatal wound. Akira reaches her dying father as Kane, showing a moment of restraint, lets her go. Later, John finds himself at a train station and discovers Akira there too. She blames John for everything that has happened and tells him he must kill Kane, or she will do it herself. Back in New York, Winston meets with the Bowery King and tells him they need to speak with John. The Bowery King notes dryly that the last time they tried that, things didn't go well. In another location, the tracker sits down with the Marquis and proposes that he will find and kill John for $25 million. After some negotiation, the Marquis drives a blade through the tracker's hand to seal the deal at $23 million. Later, John and Winston meet at Sharon's memorial. Winston tells John that he is going to run out of bullets before the High Table runs out of people willing to pull a trigger. Instead of fighting the entire underworld, Winston says John should challenge the Marquis to single combat. Members of the High Table can invoke this right, and when the challenge is properly presented, it cannot be refused. Winston tells John to go and make peace with his family, people who already hold a place at the High Table. John travels to Berlin and enters a church. Walking toward the altar, the priest draws a shotgun and fires at him. John tells him it's a nice suit as the scene cuts to the Marquis taking a call from the tracker informing him that John is in Berlin. The Marquis tells him plainly, either John dies or he does. Inside the church, John's family makes his situation very clear. He has disrupted everything. They intend to kill him until he mentions the challenge of single combat. They tell John that if he kills the man who murdered their father, they will mend his standing and welcome him back. He says he needs access to the necessary circles, and they send a man named Chuang to assist him. Together, they make their way to a kingpin who grins when Kane walks in. John's family has sold him out to protect themselves. Kane and the kingpin both have weapons pointed at each other when the tracker walks in and takes a seat as well. All 3 men want to be the one to kill John, so they settle it with cards. As the dealer somehow draws 5 of a kind, John slashes him, and everyone in the room begins attacking everyone else. Shots fly, and John moves into the club, dismantling every opponent who comes for him. He chases the kingpin down and throws him down a staircase, killing him. He takes a tooth as proof and returns to the church where his family receives him back and performs an initiation. Winston walks into a room where the Marquis is noticeably startled to see him. Winston hands him the duel notice. The terms for John's victory are his own freedom plus the restoration of Winston's title and the rebuilding of his hotel at the High Table's expense. The Marquis tells Winston that since he is John's second, he either leaves a winner or he leaves in a box. John is seated at a formal table across from the Marquis where they draw cards to determine the location, time, and weapon of the duel. The duel will be held at sunrise with pistols. The Marquis then substitutes himself and nominates Kane to fight in his place. As John leaves, Kane tells the Marquis he won't do it. The Marquis responds that if Kane wins, he and his daughter are free. John returns to the church and finds Kane waiting. The 2 old friends talk about those they love. Kane tells John that he is a dear friend, but when it comes down to a choice between John and his daughter, it has to be his daughter. John understands. Later, John goes to an abandoned station and meets the Bowery King, who presents him with a finely tailored suit and tells him he should look his best whether he's walking into a wedding or a funeral. Elsewhere, the Marquis speaks privately with one of his top men and orders that John never makes it to the duel. The man understands immediately. The contract on John has changed to seek and destroy, and the price has escalated to a staggering $26 million. The announcement goes out across every criminal network in the city. Every crew that hears it gets armed and mobilized, ready to tear the city apart to find John Wick. At the station, John tells the Bowery King he needs a weapon. The Bowery King produces a pistol with a 21-round magazine and lists off roughly 50 other features in what is clearly a special piece of equipment. John is genuinely impressed. He needs to get as close to the church as possible. The Bowery King's people take him by boat as far as they can and tell him that's the end of the line. John steps off and immediately the radio network announces his location. Men converge on him from every direction. He takes out the first two but is hit by a car. He disposes of the driver and is immediately rammed again. He deals with that one too and finds the tactic appealing, begins using a car himself as a weapon while killing more attackers. His position is updated on the radio continuously and a large coordinated force moves toward him. He throws the car into reverse and takes out a driver, then starts doing deliberate donuts, eliminating men caught in the middle. His vehicle gets rammed and flipped. John gets up and takes out 4 men efficiently. The 5th engages him up close but is quickly beaten. The Marquis' right-hand man gives chase as they trade fire between moving vehicles. The confrontation becomes a fistfight. He hurls John directly into oncoming traffic. They keep fighting until John puts him onto a car. John grabs a weapon and runs. The fighting becomes completely chaotic with bullets going everywhere and people being hit by cars constantly. John works to get off the road but keeps getting shot at. He retreats back into the traffic flow as the tracker arrives on scene, armed to the teeth and sprinting around killing anything that moves. The tracker begins targeting John as well. John gets away and jumps onto a motorcycle. The tracker's crew corners him, but John makes an extraordinary evasive move and gets inside a building where he holds the positional advantage. He works through his attackers systematically until the situation looks grim. The tracker then takes a call from the Marquis and tells him $35 million for John Wick, then hangs up. He starts eliminating rivals so he can collect the prize himself. The Marquis calls back and the tracker now wants $40 million. The Marquis agrees. Everyone is informed of the new figure. John stays in the building and takes out 2 more men using a precision rifle, putting down roughly 10 opponents in the next 10 seconds. The tracker is also firing freely until they end up fighting each other. Fists fly and John gets the tracker at gunpoint. But then the Marquis' right-hand man points his weapon at the tracker's dog, rather than at John. Without hesitation, John saves the dog instead of using the moment for himself. The tracker immediately sees what John just did and understands the kind of man he's dealing with. John runs out of the building and checks his watch. The sun is getting close to rising. His location is announced again. He stares down his attackers and then begins moving through them with the kind of focused efficiency that has made him a legend. Every floor he climbs requires him to deal with more men. He kills and keeps climbing until he is finally overwhelmed, beaten, and kicked all the way back down to the bottom of the staircase. 3 minutes remain. John looks like he's done. Then Kane appears and tells him to get up and start climbing again. He helps John to his feet and the two of them begin fighting their way up together. Kane and John as a team are extraordinary and they cut through the opposition on every floor heading to the top. The Marquis' right-hand man engages John again, but this time John puts him on the ground and stands over him with his pistol. As John is about to be finished, the tracker looks at his dog and makes his choice. He saves John's life. Kane goes back down, finds the man whose hand he pinned with a pencil, and finishes him. As Kane and John walk away together, the tracker looks at the man who hurt his dog and kills him. His dog then urinates on the dead man's head in the most fitting possible finale. John arrives at the dueling ground just in time for sunrise. The tracker takes a seat in the audience to watch. Both men remove their bulletproof vests. They are each handed a pistol and told to take their positions. Kane says to John, "See you in the next life." They pace 30 steps apart and are each given a single bullet. Kane tells the Marquis to be quiet. Winston and John share a quiet moment watching the dawn. John asks Winston for his final words. Winston tells him to go and have some fun out there. The Harbinger asks both men if they are ready. They confirm. He calls fire. Kane is hit in the shoulder. That's it for the first exchange. They close the distance and reload. Fire is called again. John catches one in the shoulder and Kane takes one in the midsection. They step closer still. Reload. Quiet, sorrowful music plays as everyone who is gathered understands that this is the end for one of them. The call comes. Fire. John is on the ground bleeding. Winston stares at him with deep concern. Even the tracker looks shaken. The Marquis picks up the final bullet, walks to Kane, and takes his weapon. Kane asks him directly whether his daughter is free. The Marquis says yes. He loads the bullet and walks to where John lies, raising the weapon and pointing it at John's head. Winston steps in, calls the Marquis arrogant, and notes that John hasn't fired his shot yet. The Marquis looks down. John pulls the trigger. The bullet goes through the Marquis's head. The tracker laughs. The Harbinger formally declares that John's obligation is satisfied and he is free. He informs Kane that both he and his daughter are likewise free. He tells Winston he will be reinstated and the Continental rebuilt. Business is concluded and the assembly disperses. Kane goes to John and calls him brother. John tells him that Kane knows he owes him one, implying that he deliberately chose not to take the kill shot on him. Winston comes to John and John asks quietly,
Will you take me home?
Winston's eyes well up as he looks at John's wounds. He says, of course. John sits alone on the steps. He thinks of Helen and whispers that word to himself. Slowly, he collapses. It was, genuinely, an almost unbearably moving moment. Back in what appears to be a graveyard, John and Helen's graves sit side by side. The Bowery King, Winston, and John's dog stand there together. Winston, completely undone, places his hand on the stone and says goodbye, my son. They walk away, and the film comes to its end. In the post-credits scene, equally quiet and emotional, Kane is carrying a bouquet of flowers and finally walking toward his daughter with a genuine smile on his face. The camera then finds Akira walking toward him from another direction, a knife already in her hand. The screen cuts to black.